Now, to the foolishness du jour. You guys know I always try to point you in the direction to cultivate a sharpening in discernment. All right. And I want to point out something that it's subtle, but it's nevertheless prominent if you pay attention to it. In much of the conversation that's happening now, Goebbels Inc. is fully invested in moving on. There's nothing to see here. The election is done. The Electoral College has voted. The elections have been certified. Everybody's been sworn in, which, of course, none of those things have happened. None of those things have happened yet. And I'm going to use an example for you of an interview between George Stephanopoulos, who reminds me of the Keebler elf. I'm sorry, he does. He reminds me of the Keebler elf. He's going to go pick some cookies. He's interviewing the South Dakota's governor, Kristi Noem. And as the conversations have percolated around the country concerning the allegations that have been presented by the Trump campaign of voting irregularities, violations of local and state election laws, and fraud and instances all around the country, I detailed for you yesterday all of the states that have litigation, and I mentioned it Friday as well, previous Friday as well. Initially, the objections were, there is no evidence of fraud or irregularities or violations of state law. But if you pay attention, you'll notice a transition in the speech. Now, before I get to that, I want to just lead in with this first piece of audio in the interview between Governor Noem and George Stephanopoulos. Listen to this in clip number 2.
The other thing that I think is going on here, George, is that this is all premature. This is a premature conversation because we have not finished counting votes. There are states that have not been called. And back in 2000, Al Gore was given his day in court. We should give President Trump his day in court, let the process unfold. Because, George, we live in a republic. We are a government that gets its power from the consent of the governed. That is the people. They give their consent on Election Day. Election Day needs to be fair, honest, and transparent. And we need to be sure that we had an honest election before we decide who gets to be in the White House the next 4 years.
Now, I've said this before, especially if you are a person who supports the former Vice President Joe Biden. I would hope you would want, and I also would want, the election for the 46th president of the United States to be above board, above reproach. I have no problem whatsoever if the legal votes cast in the general election, this past general election, elected Joe Biden. If that is what transpired legally, that's what's happened. Now, his agenda, his platform, I think it's a disaster for the United States of America. And I think one of the primary reasons why it's a disaster is that it will grease the skids toward persecution for the body of Christ in the country. Listen, the man has already pledged among the things he'll do within the first 100 days if he is elected is pass the Equality Act. I've talked at length about the Equality Act. That will be a highway toward the persecution of the church in our country. No matter how you slice it. That's where we are. All right? I can list off a litany of other things. But if the American people have decided that, then that's what it is. All I'm saying is why will we skip past confirming that that's the case? And again, I said, addition to that, I said that it's enough making the allegations in public. It's time to put up the evidence. Put up a shut up time. Where's the evidence? Well, as I said yesterday, I got literally as I walked in the studio, I was notified of the filing yesterday in the Pennsylvania federal court. I was able to read through it today. Lord willing, toward the end of the program, I'm going to get to some of the specific factual allegations that, in my opinion, these allegations must be vetted. They must be vetted. Now, what I want you to notice is that as Stephanopoulos is questioning Governor Kristi Noem, again, the governor of South Dakota, he begins by saying, where is the evidence? of fraud. Then, if you pay attention, he's going to change his verbiage ever so slightly. And I want you to see if you can catch the slight change in his verbiage. Listen to this next piece from the interview between George Stephanopoulos and Governor Kristi Noem. And this is clip 3.
Governor Noem, do you have any evidence that it wasn't an honest election? You had a tweet earlier this week saying it was rigged. Do you have any evidence at all of widespread fraud? I've spoken with Republican secretaries of state in Georgia, in Arizona. I've spoken to Republican officials across the country. They have come up with zero evidence of widespread fraud.
And that is not true.
Pause it right there for a second. Did you catch the change in the verbiage? Did you catch it, Rob? He began saying, Governor Noem, where is the evidence of fraud? Then, as he continued his questioning, the Keebler elf as he is, he changed his verbiage to ask, where is the evidence of widespread fraud? When I first heard that, I said, interesting. He moved from evidence to widespread evidence. Then, as I kept listening, you hear that repeatedly all over Goebbels Inc. Where's the evidence of widespread? Where's the evidence of widespread? Where's the evidence of widespread? And I said, is this a tacit admission that there is evidence that may not be as widespread? Come on, man. You people ain't slick. You people ain't slick. You are basically admitting there have been localized evidence of fraud even before the election on November 3rd. I shared some of it on this show. You know that there's evidence of some fraud. So then, if you are tacitly admitting, boy, these people think they slick. They ain't slick. They want you to believe that they're way smarter than you. But they're not. Just because they're on a television screen, folks, don't mean that they're smarter than you. If you pay attention, all across Goebbels Inc., nobody is saying now that there's no evidence. They're saying, where's the widespread evidence? Where is the evidence of systematized fraud? Where's the evidence of broad, grand, widespread evidence of fraud? I said, ain't that something? So y'all gonna change on a dime your talking points, of course, which it's not surprising. That's what they do. That's what they do. Which is absolutely amazing to me. So now, if you are tacitly admitting that there is some fraud and some irregularities and violations of state election laws, then if your concern then is that the scope of it isn't sufficient to overturn the results as you understand them to be currently, then why not find out just how widespread it is? Because one of the things that's happening, and I'm going to get to these allegations before, a part of the allegations that are being made is that we have evidence of fraud, but because in various locales all across the country, people who are in control of the local elections outfit, they are prohibiting anybody from the outside to examine the evidence of the fraud. That the local laws require neutral and objective poll watchers and election watchers of all parties, of both parties, but wherever there are allegations of the fraud and the irregularities, it's because that people on the local level are not allowing oversight. So those who are demanding evidence of the widespread fraud are doing so while at the very same time knowing that some of the allegations are that they don't want us to find the evidence of the widespread fraud. Boy, these people think they're slick, but they're not slick. So the Keebler elf is going to go from evidence to widespread evidence in a matter of seconds. When the facts are, folks, verbiage matters. You can change the entire scope of the conversation with one word change. Rewind it, please, Rob. George Stephanopoulos just literally revealed to you that his concern, and of course, you don't forget that George Stephanopoulos was the former staff chief for, did not have sex with that woman, Bill Clinton. Listen to this, and then listen how Governor Noem responds, and then I'm going to come right back. Go ahead and run clip 3. From the top? Yeah, from the top.
Wasn't an honest election. You had a tweet earlier this week saying it was rigged. Do you have any evidence at all of widespread fraud? I've spoken with Republican secretaries of state in Georgia, in Arizona. I've spoken to Republican officials across the country. They have come up with zero evidence of widespread fraud.
And that is not true. That is absolutely not true. People have signed legal documents, affidavits stating that they saw illegal activities. And that is why we need to have this conversation in court. The New York Times itself said that there were clerical errors. If
No
you look at what happened in
widespread
Michigan,
fraud, Governor. That's
that
very
we had
different.
computer glitches that changed Republican votes to Democrat votes. You look in Pennsylvania, dead people voted in Pennsylvania. So, George, I don't know how widespread it is. I don't know if it'll change the outcome of the election. But why is everybody so scared just to have a fair election and find out? We gave Al Gore 37 days to run the process before we decided who was going to be president. Why would we not afford the 70.6 million Americans that voted for President Trump the
Governor,
same consideration?
Now, you heard that? Did you hear that? So as Governor Nome says, hold up, Chief, you're saying there's no evidence. Here's his word, widespread fraud. She says, oh, there's evidence. And so as she's running it down for him, the evidence that she is aware of, he then tried to chime back in. But widespread, Governor, I'm talking about widespread. Well, how wide do you want the spread, Mr. Keebler? How wide do you want the spread? The fact that you are assenting to, the fact that you are acknowledging that there is some level of fraud is an indication, at least it should be if you're invested in free and fair elections. It's an indication that maybe we should get to the bottom of this. Shouldn't we? Because the facts are, listen, I told y'all I might have been born that night, but not last night. You know, if you want to try to get away with the scheme on the national presidential election, you only have to have targeted instances of fraud and voting irregularities and violations of election laws. Everybody knows, if you watch politics at all, you've paid attention to the last 2, 3, 4, 5 presidential elections, you know before the election day gets here that there's going to be about 11 to 12 states that are ultimately going to decide the way that the country goes. So the very setup for a demand for widespread, which in and of itself is a subjective term, because one man's widespread might not be spread wide for another man. Which is why I wanted you guys to catch that subtle change in verbiage, because if you listen all around the country, the people that are objecting to the president's lawsuits, the Trump campaign's lawsuits, they're objecting on the basis of there's no evidence of widespread. And every time you hear that, you should immediately say, well, wait a minute. Are you admitting that there's some fraud? And if you are admitting that there's some, why not find out just how much it is? I don't know if I can get to these. I have some more audio for another dialogue, because in many of these instances, there is an investment in not listening to the facts. So on television, I believe this was earlier today, you had the director of the Trump campaign's communications team. It's not enough time. Huh? That's what you're telling me? Rob's telling me I don't have enough time for it. I have to get to it on the other side of the break, but I'll just set it up now. Tim Murtaugh is director of the Trump campaigns. He's a Trump campaign's communications director. He was interviewed on the Fox News channel, and there was a reporter there by the name of Julie Banderas, where he's explaining to her how state election law was violated, in his view, in Pennsylvania. And when he tried to explain it, it seemed like old Julie didn't want to hear it. And again, I want you to know my position on this. No matter how it shakes out, if after the investigations it shakes out that the American populace has voted in such a way where the electors for the various states cast 270 or more votes for the former Vice President Joe Biden to be the 46th president of the United States, then that is what has happened. But if it is shown that the thing that tipped the scales in Joe Biden's favor happened to be violations of election laws and even deception, then that should be confronted and rooted out.
Back to the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner. I still have a lot to get to. Let me get going before the clock gets more disrespectful than it is. So, Tim Murtaugh, Trump campaign communications director, was on the Fox News channel being interviewed by Julie Banderas. Tim Murtaugh is attempting to explain in a succinct fashion Pennsylvania election law and why the Trump campaign believes it was violated. I want you to hear this exchange, hear a part of this exchange, because many people have heard how Kayleigh McEnany was cut off on Fox News by Neil Cavuto, and we have that audio too. But not as many people know about this, and this gets into I won't say more, but an additional substantive dialogue that, in my view, is pretty simple to follow. Listen to this. Tim Murtaugh talking to Julie Banderas on the Fox News channel. It's clip 4. Go.
The fact is that we were drawing attention to this prior to Election Day. That's why the Supreme Court was already involved. And I think you misstated something there a little bit. It is Pennsylvania state law that ballots must be received by Election Day, not postmarked.
November
received
3rd.
by Election Day. Right. So by extending the deadline for votes to come in, that is contrary to what the state legislature had done. They effectively moved Election Day by 3 days. And remember, this is what Democrats accused President Trump of wanting to do months ago. They said, oh, he's gonna move Election Day. Well, Democrats actually did it. And it goes beyond this. We have sworn affidavits under the penalty of perjury from a postal worker in Erie who says that he and others were commanded to backdate ballots to make them acceptable to come in, even though they did arrive after Election Day and after the period. Backdating ballots, that's illegal. We have an affidavit from Michigan from an election worker saying the same thing.
Right.
So, what Tim Murtaugh was explaining, well, first you heard at the very end. Again, these are the allegations. Murtaugh is asserting that we have affidavits which become exhibits that are offered in courts of law as evidence. We have affidavits from people who worked in the United States the United States Post Office, who said we were instructed to backdate mail-in ballots. Don't you think that's something we need to get to the bottom of? Now, the question is always, well, Abe, how many of them were there? I don't know. Don't you think we should find out? And Murtaugh is also explaining correctly that the Pennsylvania state law never changed. The state law required all votes, including those that were sent by mail, to be received by 8 p.m. on Election Day. What happened in the court system is that the judges, who do not have the lawful authority to govern election law in the state of Pennsylvania, but the judges in the state court system said, we want to extend that date to November 6th. And again, this is an issue, folks, that did not just arise after the November 3rd election. This issue was actually began to be litigated prior to the November 3rd election. This is what Tim Murtaugh was explaining to Julie Banderas, and is saying this is effectively changing the election day. Julie Banderas, who is a very intelligent woman, was acting like she wasn't understanding what Murtaugh was saying. Listen to this in clip number 5.
Right.
The election
These are
day
really
was not
serious
moved.
allegations.
The election day has been.
Yes.
Listen, but you have to. Okay.
If the legislature set the date.
The election day was November 3rd.
Yes, it was.
And if ballots came in after November 3rd, as long as that ballot was. Wait a second. Hold on a second. No, you're not listening to what I'm saying. If that ballot was mailed before Election Day, in other words, if you put that ballot in the mail on November 2nd, it's not going to get to Pennsylvania or any of these counties until November 4th, possibly November 5th. If it's postmarked November 3rd, that's not moving election day. That's giving it a few days to get to the ballot counters.
You didn't listen to what I said. State law in Pennsylvania says that ballots must be received by Election Day.
All right.
Not postmarked by Election Day, received. The Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the State Supreme Court of Pennsylvania should not change the law as passed by the people's elected representatives in Harrisburg in the state legislature. Ballots must be received by Election Day.
We have to get back to our Senate Judiciary Committee.
You're confusing the
Tim
law.
Murtaugh, thank you.
She cut him off. She cut him off. She cut him off on the Fox News channel as he's explaining to her, and it seems like she didn't want to hear it. She's explaining, I know it may appear to be kinder and gentler to you, Ms. Banderas, But the law in Pennsylvania is that the ballots, mail-in or in person, must be received by 8 p.m. on Election Day. Receiving any ballots after that is, his argument was, effectively changing the Election Day. Now, I know she may disagree with that, but it's not that she didn't understand what he was saying. Okay? And again, this is the issue that is being litigated at the Supreme Court. This is the issue that caused Justice Samuel Alito to issue his order saying, yo, you guys were supposed to segregate any ballots received after November 3rd, between November 3rd and November 6th. They were supposed to be put in a separate pile because we never got to the merits at the Supreme Court as to whether or not the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court had the constitutional authority to change Pennsylvania election law. And then in addition to that, there were some state maneuverings that would allow ballots to be received between November 6th up to November 9th. Those are supposed to be put in a separate stack. So between the 3rd and the 6th, one stack. Between the 6th and the 9th, another stack. But I heard, I'm translating Abe's speech, this is Justice Alito said, I heard that y'all ain't do that. So I'm saying do it. Because we still have to navigate this issue as to the constitutionality of receiving them after. So that is what a part of what is being litigated. So in addition to communicating the information, I wanted you to show, man, Fox News. When she realized, okay, Mr. Murtaugh, we have to go. Now, I want to get into some of the particular allegations I showed you yesterday. I have right in front of me the 105-page petition that was filed in the Middle District, the United States District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania. If you're watching, I'm showing you there. I want to show you some of the factual allegations that are being made there, which, in my opinion, I would want to know this information. We need to get down to the bottom of this. So some of the factual allegations that are being made. One, you just heard that the litigation began before November 3rd. Votes being received after November 3rd, that's a violation of Pennsylvania state electoral laws. Next, did you realize, and I didn't realize this until I read this petition, did you realize that there were 682,479 mail-in and absentee ballots exclusively in Allegheny and Philadelphia counties that were received and processed without review by both political parties, without poll watchers present? And to get to the scope question, okay, if there is fraud or violations of election laws, is it widespread and is it sufficient enough to change the election results? Right before coming on to the show, I checked the difference in vote count between Biden and Trump, as is being reported currently, is 49,000 votes. In those two counties alone, according to this petition, there were 682,479 mail-in and absentee ballots that were counted without any Republican poll watching oversight. Without any. And according to the petition and Pennsylvania state law, they are required legally to allow that oversight. 682,000 votes mailed in. That's one of the allegations in the petition. Next, I'll read this directly from the petition. Quote, Allegheny and Pennsylvania counties conducted the canvassing and tabulation in convention center rooms and placed observers far away from the action. In the case of Philadelphia County, when an emergency order was issued requiring them to provide meaningful access to representatives, the petition says Philadelphia failed to comply. Failed to comply or refused to comply. Some of the same counties that refused to even comply with a Supreme Court order. Interesting. This is a huge allegation. I'm trying to boil it down. The petition reads, I'll read it from the petition and then I'll try to translate it. The petition reads, quote, Democrat-heavy counties violated the mandates of the election code and the determinations of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, advantaging voters in Democrat-heavy counties as compared to those in Republican-heavy counties. Democrat-heavy counties engaged in pre-canvass activities prior to November 3rd, 2020 by reviewing received mail-in ballots for deficiencies. such as lacking the inner secrecy envelope or lacking a signature of the elector on the outer declaration envelope or the outer declaration envelope. Those offending counties then would notify those voters in order to allow them to cure their ballot deficiencies by voting provisionally on election day or canceling their previously mailed ballot and issuing a replacement. In other words, those counties provided their mail-in voters with the opportunity to cure mail-in and absentee ballot deficiencies, while Republican-heavy counties followed the law and did not provide a notice and cure process, disenfranchising those that complied with the election code to cast legal votes. Let me translate that. The law in Pennsylvania says that not one vote, not one mail-in vote, not one absentee ballot can be opened prior to election day. It is illegal in Pennsylvania to open those ballots before election day. The allegations in the lawsuit include specific counties in Pennsylvania opened their mail-in ballots before election day. They looked at specific ballots that had deficiencies that would have normally caused those ballots to be rejected, whether they were not signed appropriately, whether or not they didn't have the proper other verification information. And in those counties, the petition alleges there were Democrat-heavy counties. They called the people and say, hey, you're missing stuff on your ballot. You need to come and correct it. None of the other counties did these things because it's a violation of Pennsylvania state law. Is that not worth finding out? Man, this clock is so disrespectful. I have so much more to get to. And there are scores of affidavits that have been submitted saying, yes, this happened. This happened. This happened. When you have a difference in vote totals that is so razor thin, you have over 6.7 million votes cast in Pennsylvania, and the difference is only 49,000 votes. The counties that are named as defendants in this lawsuit, in addition to the Pennsylvania Secretary of the Commonwealth, Kathy Bachvar, it's Allegheny County's Board of Elections, Center County's Board of Elections, Chester County's Board of Elections, Delaware County's Board of Elections, Montgomery County's Board of Elections, Northampton County's Board of Elections, and Philadelphia County's Board of Elections. This is amazing. Because if you have some of the counties, perhaps Allegheny County, perhaps Philadelphia County, that they're looking at their ballots and saying, oh, no, we need these accounts. Let's call them to come up here and fix what's wrong. They're opening before election day. And then you have the other counties, they're not opening them before election days. So in the other counties where they may have irregularities that would invalidate those ballots, guess what happens to those ballots? They're not counted. I didn't even get to the allegations in the lawsuit that said, I'll read this one. It says this, quote, additionally, plaintiffs have learned that certain county election boards were mailing unsolicited mail ballots to voters despite the fact that they had not applied for a mail-in ballot for the general election, thus resulting in voters who received 2 ballots. The offending counties also failed to undertake any effort to ensure the destruction of the duplicate ballots. You know what that means, folks? Voting twice. There's more, but the clock is disrespectful. I also have in front of me the lawsuit filed in Maricopa County in Arizona. That's in the state court. Filled with affidavits, filled with people saying, hey, this happened. I would like to testify to this in court.